Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Build, Measure, Learn cycle. Now you know who's an entrepreneur, and you have a first idea why entrepreneurs have to make mistakes. But how do they make mistakes? And an answer to that is the so-called Build, Measure, Learn cycle. You basically might remember that quote by Professor Kamke. He said, failures do not hinder progress, but instead sticking to the suspicion and so on not 100 times, but only 10 times, maybe only once. If you only want to make each mistakes once, we saw before you have to capture your learning. But this is not all. There's more to that. And if you look at the development the street scooter was going through, it was a very typical development in that way, in the so-called build, measure, learn cycle, BML cycle. Because what they did is they had an idea. They had an idea of a cheap electric car. So they built a first prototype, which was a very, very easy, cheap electric car, and then gave it to a potential target group, which was people who were delivering mail. And they were looking at the product, and they were also basically trying that out. And what they did is then they captured the learning. They measured what the people said, for example. And with these measures, it might be data or it might be interviews or whatever, they went into the structured learning process in order to change the idea and build the next release of the prototype. So the first thing we said is it's important to capture the learning. Even if you make a mistake, it's important to learn out of that mistake. The other thing, which we believe is very important, and this gives it a very structure, the entire process, is that you do not only start building a product in any way, but by having a good idea, you also build an hypothesis. A hypothesis of what brings the biggest value to the customer. How should my car be built to bring the biggest value to the delivery people? So this is the hypothesis of value, for example. And this hypothesis of value is being used in order to build the car, the first prototype. So what you do not only do, you do not only capture the learning, but you also start the learning processes based on a hypothesis. And that's very important, because if you have a good hypothesis, not just any hypothesis, but the so-called leap of faith, and this is all taken from Eric Ries's book on lean startup, and you might remember my colleague Frank already introduced this book to you, and this is in more detail the Build, Measure, Learn cycle. You see that this is the very structured process which you can not only use, and Eric Ries used it in the internet sector, where it's a lot easier to build the first prototype of a website and change the prototype, but you can also use it for a physical product. And this is how the street scooter had been built. They started with the first prototype and then gave it to the people, and they had a good hypothesis for that. Then they checked the hypothesis, captured the learning, and took the learning in order to elaborate on the idea more and more. And by going that cycle over and over again, I mean, if you have a physical product, it's a little more costly than having a website, for example. You can use the build, measure, learn cycle to structure failure. Because what you will do is you will fail in that process, especially if you test different hypotheses. You have a hypothesis for the street scooter. The one is with 2 seats in the front, the other is with 1 seat in the front. And then you will test which the delivery people like more. And you'll find out it's the one with the 1 seat, not with 2 seats. So this is a typical hypothesis. You have this hypothesis of how many seats are really necessary. You build 2 different prototypes, you test them, and you see the result. And this brings you to building a car with only a single seat and some other functionalities on the other side. So this is the best way to structure your learning process. The Lean Startup approach by Eric Ries and the build, measure, learn cycle out of that. What I'd like to do in the following is to understand the entire Lean Startup process in order to understand how actually you can start building your process, your product within that.